Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelley Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations.
Today, we're welcoming Megan Williams to the show. Megan is currently the VP of Global Technology, Strategy, and Transformation at TransUnion. She is an innovative leader with over 20 years of experience leading global multi-year transformations and implementing large, complex program delivery in fast-paced technical industries. Combining a hands-on, forward-thinking approach with an extensive background in strategic alignment, process reengineering, budgeting and forecasting, and translation of regulatory requirements to drive success. Her approach to transformation is to promote a culture of innovation focused on the continuous improvement of delivery processes, team collaboration, and the IT organization as a whole. She encourages a strategic mindset centering on adding high value to the organization through transformation and its execution. Megan believes that great leaders unceasingly lead by examples and should create a learning culture where associates can expand and grow their skills without fear or judgment or retribution. Welcome to the show, Megan.
Hey, good to be here.
Megan, if you don't mind, please share with our listeners a little bit more about your current role at TransUnion.
Yeah, so as you said, I joined TransUnion 4 years ago, and initially I joined because had started a large cloud transformation program. And that program was centered really around getting off of our on-premise data centers into the cloud across the globe. So predominantly TransUnion, our highest revenue and largest revenues in the US, but we also operate in over 30 different countries. And the real value driver for that transformation was cost savings. So by getting out of all our data centers, we could save money by being in the cloud. Although you're moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model, there was still significant savings that we could realize as an organization. So my role initially was to drive the global cloud transformation, really looking at how we were going to refactor the applications for transformation into the cloud. And our main focus with that transformation was around really lifting and shifting. So the key was getting out of the data centers and into cloud, as opposed to were we going to then leverage the opportunity to possibly modernize those applications. We pivoted our transformation 2 years ago. We did get a lot of applications into the cloud. We're running in the cloud successfully, both in GCP, which is Google Cloud Platform, as well as predominantly AWS. We pivoted about a year and a half ago to really modernize those applications. So what we realized through the cloud transformation was not necessarily that many cost savings. And as I mentioned earlier, you are moving from a capital expense to an operational expense. And we realized that a lot of our applications actually needed to be modernized more than lifted and shifted into the cloud because we weren't going to benefit from economies of scale by being in the cloud. So our modernization effort is around looking at our application tech stack. And we've got a lot of applications that do the same thing. TransUnion has grown through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and that means we've got very similar applications performing very similar services. The idea now is to take the best services from all of those applications and use a platform to deliver those services to our customers across the globe. So the way I think of it in very simplistic terms is Microsoft Office and having the key that allows text to be bold available in all of your applications, whether it's Excel, Word, PowerPoint, but then having very specific customizations for each application where PowerPoint maybe do animations and Excel does wonderful formulas and calculations for us. So that's what we're working on now in our modernization transformation.
It's very exciting. And platform is it's a very hot topic right now as people are trying to realize some of those aspirational goals when it comes to migrations to the cloud. The story you just shared, very common, right? Like, let's get it into the cloud, lift and shift. The costs at that point get not realizing the initial goal, right?
Yes.
So now how do we do this to said leveraging those economies of scale and cloud native architecture? I'd love to dig into that more later on, but why don't we start with a little bit more about you and your background? As we discussed before, you're not from America. I thought that accent was more Texan. when we first met? I think it was Alabama,
Yeah,
maybe.
a little further south, but at least
Okay.
you're getting there, right? I grew up in a small town in South Africa, a small university town. And my father was actually a professor of journalism, but he's always loved gadgets and things. And very early on, brought home a computer from the journalism department to our house. This computer did absolutely nothing.
Hmm.
It flashed a cursor, and that was pretty much it. And for months, I kept staring at this thing, asking my father, like, can we play TV games on it? Which in those days, TV games weren't that great anyway. I mean, I don't even think there was Frogger yet. I think it was maybe Blocks or whatever the bouncing ball was that like
Pong.
slowly
Pong.
Pong. There we go. There we go. This computer didn't even do that. But he then did bring home another computer that was actually had a Microsoft DOS operating system. And I wrote my first Hello World application, which was literally the prompt of like, say hi and it's Hello World. And I was just blown away. I absolutely loved it. And that's kind of where my journey into technology began. So went to university, studied computer science and economics. Again, my father insisted that I did economics because he said it would make me really good at my job. I think it has as I've got later in my career, because as you kind of get into leadership, you suddenly do have to understand the difference between CapEx and OpEx. Very early on, I was like, I don't know what the old man was talking about. I'm just writing code and having fun. So, but yeah, when I graduated, I was really fortunate because at the time in my early 20s, there was a reciprocal visa that the UK had set up. It was late 90s. I think they realized they had a lack of IT skills as we were, I don't know, those of us who remember the year 2000 problem, but they needed IT skills and there was a visa I could go and work on in the UK because they'd opened this potential to go and work for 2 years. So I jumped on a plane, went to the UK with my computer science degree in hand and got a job which had nothing to do with the Y2000 problem because I really didn't want to be a COBOL programmer. Even though I watched a lot of my friends make a lot of money over the next 2 years as we went into the year 2000. And I stood outside Big Ben when the millennium happened and saw the fireworks and waited for everything to turn dark as we expected it to, and nothing happened.
No
So
planes fell out of the sky. There
no
wasn't,
plane. Yeah, we were all
it's
good.
kind of
So
crazy. We're having more issues with planes currently,
yeah,
right?
right. Yeah.
As this
We should
recording's happening, it's a little bit less, Y2K, a little bit more internet there, a little bit more cloud.
right, totally. Yeah. So that's kind of where I went and started. I mean, my career was Visual Basic initially and wrote tech software for a tech software company. Those were the days also when we delivered releases in CD-ROMs, which is pretty cool, because you kind of had a very tangible asset once you'd like delivered your code and then you'd see them package up the CDs and you'd see the marketing team go out with the flashy looking CDs and brochures of our tech software updates. So yeah, spent 10 years in the UK, which was marvelous, mainly in the insurance and banking sector, doing a lot of coding and kind of slowly moved more towards kind of program management and leadership. There was sort of a point where I think it was like, do I become an architect or do I become a program manager? I would say in those days, technical people found it much more difficult to talk to business than like now. A lot more technical people are kind of through training, and I think university degrees have changed. It's easier for them to bridge that gap. When I was then there were a lot of people that found it really hard to move between the two. IT people are IT people and like to be in dark rooms writing code. So I kind of bridge that gap
And having fun. You said
and
that
having
before,
fun.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. A lot more fun.
Not that economic stuff. That's not fun.
Not that economic stuff. No, no. They're in the basement with like lights and gaming chairs and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of how I fell into program management. Yeah, and then long story short, went back to South Africa for 7 years. Actually, that was for my husband's job. He wanted to work on the World Cup in South Africa. Sky News said, "Great, go ahead." So we moved back to South Africa. It worked for me. My kids were really young. I was happy to be back with sunshine. It rains a lot in the UK, which I only realized. I think more when you come out of it, you're like, "Wow, it really rained a lot there." So came back to South Africa, and then he got offered an opportunity to go and work in Spain. So kind of act first, think later. We arrived in Spain with two young kids and we're like, okay, we can't really speak the language, but hey, let's see what we can do here. And yeah, continued to work really, I guess, in large transformation programs. I think when we moved to South Africa, that's when I really started to get into more kind of these longer terms, kind of multi-year programs. I think by benefits of like maturity and having worked in a lot of kind of projects, but like that kind of, we need someone who can manage this large program delivery, cross-functional, lead the delivery of this transformation that we're trying to do. Started doing that in South Africa for an insurance company, and love the idea of chaos and putting order to that chaos. Love the forming, storming, norming approach of how like seeing those things progress. I don't love it as much as I loved writing code. I'm going to like be honest. I absolutely loved writing code and seeing the results of that. Like going back to that tax software, it was just brilliant to be able to write some code, get really stuck on a problem, maybe even for weeks, and then seeing the results of that. It's so tangible. But, watching a program develop and seeing that, some of that stuff happen in a different way is still good. It's just a lot of PowerPoint presentations versus like actually seeing the code that you've written develop into something bigger.
Well, I'm curious before we keep going, like with all of that experience in going to different countries and different cultural and professional, has that helped you? Do you think that's given you a very unique experience on the diversity of different cultures? I know that they're mostly Western, right? London, Spain,
Yes.
US, but I could imagine there's got to be something you've learned from like pushing those things out to the edges.
I mean, I hope so. I like to think it does. I'd like to think it gives me a perspective that's different. It certainly helps me speaking to different teams, right? Like we've got teams in 30 different countries, and I've always felt very comfortable being able to talk to people, whoever they are or whatever their background is. I think understanding where different cultures operate best as well. I think, for example, when I was in Spain, the way that they work really kind of winds up during the day as opposed to like in the US by 7 a.m. people are working really hard, but by 4 a.m. it tends to taper off. In Spain, it was totally the opposite. So, and my boss who was in the UK would call me at 9 a.m. and go like, "What's happening, Megan? Like, how are we getting on today?" And I'd be like, "Dude, you're gonna have to call me in a few hours because we're just having coffee right now." But at 7 p.m., everyone was still like in the office buzzing, working really hard.
Wow.
So it's just I think that was fairly interesting. And then just being able to relate to different people, no matter what the culture is, people have like their personality types, no matter where you live. And I think once you realize that, he's behaving that way, not because he's Spanish or because he's South African or whatever, he's just that kind of personality. I think, so I've met Miguel in many different guises, and I've met like Lucy in the same sort of guises. So yeah, I hope it gives me a different perspective,
That's
a
interesting.
positive perspective, not necessarily different, but positive.
I think anyway you slice it, diverse, right? Informed,
Yes.
right? It's just
Yeah.
awareness of like, and to your point of like that, I always think when you say, "Hey, I've worked with this size of company and that size of company," and the Miguel, the Lucy, the whatever,
Hmm.
you start to understand that these people, they exist and that there's a reason why they are the way that they are, and it creates a universality. At least that's my perspective of like, hey, this person's driven by this, they're motivated by that, or they're, a lot of the negative stuff comes out of fear, right? Like they're afraid of,
Yes.
and like you mentioned, trying to do leadership and change, right, without fear of retribution or fear of
Yes.
criticism,
Yeah.
right? That's like
Yeah.
90% of the problem is somebody's afraid they're going to get blamed, they're going to criticize, they're going to be
Yeah.
falsely, right,
Yep.
blamed or maybe accurately blamed, right? But they're going to
Yeah,
hide from
someone
it.
uploaded a file they shouldn't have uploaded on Thursday night. I'm just saying.
Somebody did. Yeah.
I don't know who
So
they were, but wow, bad mistake.
I show you with your background and the organization, you deal with a lot of different organizations as well. How many companies are underneath Madison?
We're up to 82 now.
Yeah. And they're all somewhat different. Like you guys don't try to standardize, right? You let each one of those
Yeah, they
organizations
run
kind of,
autonomously. Yeah,
yeah. So do you find that same kind of challenge? You see that universality in folks?
I do. And I think, to your point, Megan, there's certain types of individuals, and it doesn't matter where they're at in the world. You have to understand, to Patrick's point, what motivates them, what gets them out of bed in the morning, and what they're passionate about. So,
Yes, totally.
Pretty cool stuff. Yeah. So I did cut you off. I know I do want to
Uh,
talk about the large transformation programs that you've gotten into, right? So if you could share some insights from leading those, and then maybe some of your ideas on balancing the risks and rewards around that.
Yeah. So I think most definitely the biggest insights, and when you talk to people, and every time I start a new one, and I still feel like we're in that forming phase, and I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do this, right? Every time you still have that feeling of like, this seems really big, and this, I'm not sure if this is the right approach, kind of a thing when you're still forming. It's still number one, and you talk to people about like, what do you think it is? Like, what's the most important thing? And it's totally people. It is totally people and change management. Because if you can't get people to believe in the vision and where you're going with that vision, you're losing from the beginning. I think because it's also that if you've got your vision and you've got your approach and you understand what your vision is and what your approach is, and I mean this like from a leadership level, it's not necessarily me, Meg, but the higher ups than me who've come up with like, we're going to spend 500 million on a cloud transformation. We need to like, what is that vision? Why are we doing it? And what is our approach to enabling that? Then you can bring anyone along as long as you truly believe in that. And then how do you bring those people around, right? Because I think often when we talk about change management, it's like, oh, we'll send out some communication, we'll send everyone a little bit of swag, and we'll do some training, right? But it's really putting all of that together. Yeah, like totally the swag is great. Totally like the communications are important.
I flash back to the movie Office Space with the big banner. Is this good for the company? Right. And having
Right.
worked at some tech firms where I was having PTSD during that movie of like
Right.
just even the lady answering the phone, I'm like, I know that lady. I've met her. But yeah, the swag, and I think it's a great point, Megan. I think this would be very helpful. Is like I think there is like a kind of pullback feeling when people hear change management of like because I hear change management and I think that is a soft word for leadership, right? Like we should be leading people,
Yes.
right? And leadership isn't here's a tchotchke, right? And
Yeah.
a t-shirt that you are never going to wear,
Right. And
right?
another email when I force it down your throat, right?
Exactly.
Right. Because I think there's also like, is it propaganda leadership or is it like, I don't know, servant leadership type of approach? And you're totally right. It is about leadership, right? How are we going to make 5,000 people feel like the six that are in a garage innovating as we start up? Because that's what transformation really should be, right? But it can't just be forcing it down their throats with another email and another town hall and another piece of swag. It's got to all come together. And to your point about leadership is like leadership truly has to believe in the vision and talk about the vision and then the approach to that vision in a way that's really passionate. And I think with our modernized effort that we have now, Venkat Achanta, our CIO, he truly, like truly, when you talk to him, is so passionate about what we're doing and why we're doing it. You could sell his ice to Eskimos. Let me put it that way.
Well, I think you bring up a great point. I mention it a lot on here, but I do think, for you to lead requires some sales skills, right? Because you are selling the vision, right? You got to, sales and leadership both require influence, right? And
Yes.
so, how do you get 5,000 people to feel like, one, I care about you, right? Because if they don't, they're not going to go, right? So, is there something that you've seen or you've done that you think is maybe one of the tools that you've developed that like when you get yourself in some of these big transformation projects, it's like, here's what I'm going to do.
So I think being very transparent and vulnerable is important. With my team, and I've got a fairly large team. Obviously, with my directs, I'm very open and talk very transparently. But even with my larger team, I get them together once a month and like ask me anything. And there were one or two people that will ask really challenging things and then apologize afterwards to me, like, oh, maybe I should have said that to you. And I'm totally fine with that because I think it's good for people to hear it. Like, if you're really upset or frustrated about something, then let's have a conversation. I generally don't think that it's inappropriate to ask challenging questions to me, right? There's a balance, obviously. But I think being able to say to people during these transformations, this is where we're struggling. This is why. This is what we're doing to overcome it. This was unexpected. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think my rule is just you can ask any question, be respectful, right?
Yes.
Like,
Right.
I think
Yeah.
that's like, let's be professionals. But to your point of, I always see it as a gift. You're the one telling me what everybody else is saying, right?
Right.
Like I can ignore it and stick my head in the ground, but I don't think that's going to help much, right? So
Right.
Well, and then your teams want to help you. I mean, it's all about building trust. And as soon as you open that up and you're vulnerable and they see that you're doing things about it, they want to come to you with ideas instead of keep all those to themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
I think to your point, even in sales efforts, one of the most powerful things you can do to build rapport with a potential prospect is actually ask for their help. Obviously, you want everything you need to do to create a strong relationship involves being genuine and earnest in what you're saying. But I do think so often we're afraid to ask for help. Then we wonder why none of our direct reports ask for help and why none
Yeah.
of their direct reports ask for help. And it's like, I'm so confused. Why aren't they asking for help? It's like, when's the last time you asked for help? Like, don't worry about that. That's
Yeah.
not the problem. But the
Yes.
truth of the matter is when we do ask for help, if somebody, right, if you just said, hey, I might need your help on this, right? It tells somebody that I trust you, I respect you, I value you. And I think it's a great thing to do when you're especially creating that vulnerability of like, I don't have all the answers. And I think
Yes.
that's one of those things, like, especially as like, engineers, right? We get a lot of praise for being able to do things, create things, build
Mm-hmm.
things, right? And then we feel like our value is generative, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, but it's not. Now we're that second, third, and like your level, you're two, three, four levels up where it's like the disconnected from like where the boots hit the ground and, building strong teams. It's a very difficult skill to build.
Yeah, it is. And I think ensuring that they're seeing you working, and I don't mean working hard like late hours and sending emails,
Hmm.
is like when they have asked for help, like I will reach out to the most junior person and say, like, let's have a chat because I hear there's this issue happening and like, how can I help? I know like this or that or whatever. I think a lot of people who work for me will say, Meg, the great thing about you is I know that you really understand what's happening and you're trying to help us. Without like I'm not a micromanager at all, making it sound like I am, but that there's that kind of line of like that line of like I know what's happening in your world and I'm here to help you if you want it, right? Like I've been attending it's quite funny actually. I've been attending a daily call that we had set up because there was a part of the project was that needed a lot of help and we had to have these daily calls and the project manager who was running it was doing a great job, but I was joining because there were a lot of people on the call and that we were battling to get traction with stuff. And as soon as they see a VP on the call, people just behave a little bit more like with urgency. And after about a week, the project manager set up a call with me and is like, is there something I'm doing wrong? And I was like, no, not at all. You're doing a great job. He's like, well, why do you keep joining the calls? I feel like you don't trust me. And I was like, oh
Mm.
God, I was actually coming to try and help you, but I'm going to totally back out of the calls now. And if you want me to join a call, just ping me and say, hey, Meg, I need you to join this call. So, but I'm glad that he felt like he could say that to me, that he
Yeah.
didn't feel like he couldn't. But yeah, one makes those mistakes as well where you think you're helping and people misinterpret it as micromanagement. So,
That is also a skill that I think good leaders have is the intentional absences, right?
yes.
I see stuff on Slack. I'm not jumping on it. Let's see who
Yeah.
else. Let's see who else grabs the wheel, right?
Right.
Let's create opportunities for leadership, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
and don't get me wrong, I have a much smaller organization, but I talk to other leaders, and I think that's a great behavior of like intentionally absent of like,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had it where people are like, hey, Pat, you're not talking in these meetings. And it's like the fact that you're asking me why I'm not talking in meetings tells me I was doing it wrong before,
Right.
right? Means
Yeah.
and that's one of my rules is like the longer I can be in a meeting where I don't have to talk, the more I'm winning,
Yeah.
right? So, like,
Yes.
I know as leaders, we're like, we're going to come in and tell everybody, but don't get me wrong, like you said, we've talked about this before with the idea that over communicating is critical, right? So you got to over
Mm-hmm.
communicate, but then there's a time to see, did the message get received, right?
Yes.
Like, do I
Yeah.
have to keep going? So how do you practice over communication and maintain that clear vision for your team during transition?
Oh, that's a tough question. So I think it's the over communication, not meaning like continually send the same email, right? I think there's things like, hey, can we quickly connect? There's an email, there's maybe a message. Did you follow up on this? Were we able to connect on this piece? So I think it's using multiple channels to communicate the same things. I think also having conversation, and when I say in-person conversations, I just mean talking rather than emailing or just writing on a message, not necessarily being in the same room, is really key. And then continuing to have those conversations. Hey, can we chat? As opposed to like, hey, did you follow up on blah, blah, blah? I think that's really important. Sometimes you obviously need to follow up those chats with, like, let's not forget we chatted about these three things, because a lot of things are happening all the time. And sometimes I can't even remember, like, what did we agree to do? And I'll have to look at my notes, etc. And also making sure there were no misunderstandings about maybe what we've agreed to do. But I think over communication is key, but using different channels to do it, not just
Mm,
continually using one single communication device.
awesome. Shelly, is there stuff that you've seen that works at Madison when it comes to, say you're acquiring new business and or whatever the big strategic maneuvers are? Is there anything that you've seen that's critical to making that successful?
We've got a team that will actually go in and assimilate, right? And they're just really there to support those businesses, not to hand them a playbook and tell them
Hmm.
what to do. So I think right off the bat, we're setting the expectations that we trust you. You're part of this organization for a reason, and we're here to support versus to direct them. So that's
Yeah.
been successful for us.
I think it's as long as you're simplifying it down,
Yeah.
right? So that's like something digestible, right? Where it's like,
Yes.
I have a son that goes to Alabama, so I've suddenly become a big Saban fan. So I'll just did not like Alabama growing up. Irish Catholic kid from Chicago, Notre Dame was our team, but I'm a huge Alabama fan now. But like he talks about having a standard, and that's one of the things that I constantly reinforce with my organization about like we're a services organization. We gotta have to have a standard about what we do with our clients, and it's just really setting a standard and being able to drive towards that. So that's the verbiage, and then how we reinforce with stories outside of that about like, hey, this person did this. She's really upholding our standard, exceeding the standard, those types of things, and I find that to be helpful, right? It does lead to a lot of uncomfortable questions because you're putting a foot in the ground and you're saying this is what it is. And then some
Right.
people are going to you're going to get some feedback on like, well, why is that? That doesn't seem right, which is
Yeah.
great, in my opinion, because you're getting real clear then, right? Of
Yes.
like
Yeah.
what's really of value and what are we trying to get accomplished. And if it leads to, unfortunately people choosing that this is not the right place for them. It doesn't happen often, and it's a very rarely. It usually more along the lines of I'm going to need some time to think about what this means, and but I think more times than not, strong leadership pays the bills. That people, even if you don't fully agree with the mission, you appreciate the strong leadership, and I think there's a huge opportunity there. I think we really have a real shortage of strong leaders, and I
Yeah.
think
I
that's
think that's true.
that's something we really need to work on
Yeah.
as a society of like, I mean that honestly. Like, I don't think we're really creating the leaders of the future who are going to like lead the charges in what needs to happen
Yeah.
we got some challenging decades coming up. I don't think that's provocative by any stretch of the imagination. So
Right.
we're definitely going to need some better leaders to pick up the baton and keep it moving. So
Right.
Meg, I really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing your experience and your humor and your love for Visual Basic. You've got a friend
So
in me,
great. Yeah.
right?
It was a great coding.
I mean, event-driven programming was revolutionary, and people
Oh,
just
oh,
didn't on
yeah.
click. It's on
Yeah.
click, right? I'm doing
Yeah.
something. I don't need to think about this anymore.
Right.
But
It was brilliant. I love it.
well, maybe we'll start a new Visual Basic consulting firm, and
For
we'll
sure.
totally.
Totally. It's
I
gonna,
don't know who
yeah.
our customers will be, but maybe ourselves, right? We'll just hire ourselves. That'll be the end.
That's enough. It's
It's
enough.
not a growth industry. I think COBOL is still, I mean, COBOL's still crushing it,
I know, right? Java as well.
right?
Java's
But I
been around
mean,
forever.
who would have thought COBOL, right?
I know. I know.
Yeah, 30, 40 years later, still rocking it.
Yeah.
So
Still rocking it.
I really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Meg.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. We also want to thank our listeners. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.